I also want to, as part of the organising committee, want to apologise for the lack of the chairs in the room. We've got a lot of people in here. When we put the sessions together, we're always uncertain. Is this a big session or a small session? And we're 15 months away for implementation on this stuff. But I think it's a testament to how important this issue is that we are stocking density so high in here. So I'm talking about managing expectations, and the previous speakers have done a great job in looking inside the industry here and say, okay, the world's changing. What's it going to mean to these players, and how are we going to respond in a best and appropriate and efficient way? I'm just going to fill out the picture a little bit, I think, if this works, and step back about, not our own expectations, but the expectations of all the people around us, because this initiative didn't come from within our industry, it came from outside of our industry, and the people that have motivated those changes are interested in what happens and have their own expectations. So who's looking through the glass at us? Obviously the professional industry critics. I won't spend much time on them because we'll never make them happy. The government entities themselves that have made the changes for their own reputations and for the purposes of the legislation. They want to have a feeling that they've done something constructive. And as you're probably mostly aware, this isn't an act of Congress. This didn't come from Congress. It came from within the agency. So they've got an investment in looking at it. We're, I would say, 2 years away from implementation of this change. We've already had people in the federal legislature bringing in forward new initiatives to say either this isn't enough, we need to go further, the prevention issue being under the microscope, how we know we're going to be reducing use and how we're going to demonstrate we're going to be reducing use. How are we going to show this is successful in reducing the public health burden? So there's people who are thinking this change might have measurable outcomes on all those things. Obviously there's people in the scientific arena who want to know. General consumers probably are too busy in their lives to spend too much time thinking about this or even knowing it's there. But it's those upper groups that what I really want to talk about generally is from all those groups what might be expectations and what might be realistic or measurable outcomes, and it's not that easy. So this, at the end of the day, or the beginning of the day, it's motivated by perceived concerns about public health. The whole motivation to do this is we have a well-documented problem of resistant bacteria in human infections that's been, I guess, growing over the last 50 years or so. And I guess a 50-year debate about the role that animal use has had in that has really motivated this change. If you're talking about alcohol or recreational drugs or whatever you want to talk about, it's very well demonstrated there's a link between availability and use. Okay, the more available things are, the more they're likely to be used. The less available they are, the higher the price will be. But there's some general concepts in the stewardship thing, because we can say this change would be a success simply by reducing availability, because if there's less availability, we're going to have less abuse. The more oversight we have, we'll have less abuse. The veterinary profession is going to assume a lot more, A, responsibility, B, accountability for the way antimicrobials are used in the food production system. And a lot of people would rationally argue, how can that be a bad thing? We're taking products away from anyone being able to buy into Fleet Farm and use abuse as they wish, towards people who are trained, who are registered professionals, who are now going to be having a lot more influence on those decisions. So we should be seeing that from a general point of view, there's a rational expectation that this will reduce abuse, at least in terms or inappropriate use. And obviously we've still got this difficult issue of defining what appropriate use is. No one's arguing about treatment in terms of individual treatment of clinically affected animals, but as we drift across the spectrum, control, prevention, as everyone's pointed out, the production thing's going away. The prevention is the next one under the microscope, and those professional industry critics are really wanting to just back us back across the spectrum there towards treatment being the really only appropriate use. Okay. So what does success look like? And I've got a list of a number of things we could talk about here, and I won't go through them all. Health, pig welfare on the animal side and on the human side. The first thing is we need to comply with the regulations. And is compliance success? One thing we can argue about that, non-compliance is failure, and I think the previous speakers have spoken about that. If we see people who aren't complying with the law, veterinarians, feed mills, others, and this is not unique to here. In Denmark, when they did this 15 years ago, there were veterinarians prosecuted for illegal activities and smuggling drugs back in over borders, also the sorts of things that happen when prohibition happens. You know, there's always a segment that will act on it. But that, I guess, the visibility of our industry now and its fragile public image, I guess, there's a real responsibility of people to say, okay, our drug companies are moving along, they're being compliant, our veterinarians need to be compliant, everyone we were talking to needs to be compliant. Obviously, compliance in itself doesn't mean anything in terms of public health benefit. Is simply reducing use success. And what we've seen, and Jennifer and Liz and I have spent some time looking at European systems for measuring use. What we see pretty generally is the whole argument is about reducing resistance, but once the things get set in motion, that gets forgotten, and the whole argument becomes about reducing use, and reducing use becomes the goal in itself. So we've seen in Holland, the government told the swine industry, you have 2 years to reduce your total antibiotic use 50%, and it's your responsibility, and they did it. And then the next instruction was, well, now we want 70%, with no consideration of public health benefits of resistance or anything else. It's saying, okay, less is more, and we just want use to go down, and where does it stop? So I think we need to, again, because we have those pig health, food safety, arguably, pig welfare, and cost of food arguments to come in. We have to say this isn't a one-sided accounting. This is a game of trade-offs, and these products are used because they have benefits in various areas, and the conversation about reducing use has to be balanced with the negative effects that have occurred and demonstrably occurred in some of these industries. So we've got a whole issue now of how are we going to measure use, and how's that, and I'll be working with some of these guys over the next year. All I'll say on the on public health side is there's all these things we could look at that people might say, well, success will be success if we've got less residues, we've got less resistance, all those things, but we don't have actually particularly, for most of them, particularly good ways of measuring those outcomes. So we can do the use side. We're not all that well placed to figure out what public health benefits might be. I'll just step back over Denmark and the EU, because they've done this experiment, and they've done it variably, 15, 20 years ago. First expectation is reduced use. We're going to make this change, and we'll have less use of antibiotics. It won't have much impact on production. There will be a reduction of antibiotic resistance in the animal isolates and also in the human isolates, particularly for things like foodborne diseases that go through. And there will be reduced risk to human health, particularly with respect to zoonotic and foodborne pathogens, but also just other bugs that are less likely to be carrying resistant genes around. So that's what people in the pie in the sky will say, we'll do this, and all these wonderful things might happen. Okay, a little bit of data you may have seen before, and this is Denmark, and this is antimicrobial use in tonnes. The first thing they did way back was ban a particular drug, avapacin, that's never been used in North America, and they banned veterinary sales, which is a whole other discussion that we won't get into today. And you can see from that peak they had a pretty substantial reduction following that, and that's when they put their growth promoting brands in finishing in 1998 and 2000. And then if you look at the blue figure, the blue bars there are the therapeutic or non-production uses of antimicrobials, which were actually lowest in 1999 and have subsequently grown. And the red line, the red dots, are their production. So they're saying production is not the end of the world. We keep producing pigs, we keep producing milk, but we didn't actually have really noticeable reductions in antimicrobial use until very close to the end, which is where they introduce what's their yellow card system, which is a penalty system where they're monitoring use in all producers and by veterinarians, and those that are at the high end of the spectrum get a visit from the authorities. So, but again, interestingly enough, their lowest use was in 1999 before they banned the weaned pigs. And what was seen, there was a lot of replacement of growth promoting use with therapeutic use. Just another one here. This is data from survey data in Denmark. The red line there, the vertical one, is where they phased out growth promotants in the EU, and that showed, this is in the fattening pig population, they had pretty substantial increases in use in the first couple of years after removal of growth promotants. That was linked to primarily problems of enteric disease in weaned pigs. So the idea that we'll do this and there'll be an automatic drop in antimicrobial use isn't what's happened in these other countries. So again, putting rational expectations in front of people is something we need to do rather than live in the dream. Okay. This is salmonella data. I'm old enough to have been around when all this stuff was being discussed in Denmark and Europe, and the main driver was salmonella. Salmonella was the big concern, and resistance in salmonella. These are just data. I won't get into the detail, but just get an appreciation of the direction of the lines. They from left to right, they tend to be going down or tend to be going up. To my eye, they tend to largely be going up. And see here we've got pigs, pork, imported pork, humans travelling aboard. This is later data, and again, most of the lines, if anything, trending in the upward direction. I sort of put those two together and looked at the 1998 to 2004 data and then 07 to 12, and you get a pretty clear indication there that at least in salmonella in Denmark, the trend in antimicrobial resistance hasn't been in the direction that people were expecting it to be. So again, we can think, well, if we do this, this will happen. Most of you are aware of the law of unintended consequences. Things don't always turn out the way we imagine. MRSA, many of you have probably heard about because it's been a hot topic, and it's one that I've been working on over the last few years. We have these livestock variants that have appeared. It's been a topic of debate, and it's been central to discussion about growth promotants and saying, well, this growth promotant use, many publications have linked growth promotant use with the emergence of MRSA, despite the fact that they've got no evidence. And this is, again, data from Denmark, and this is just all their MRSA cases. That is when they banned their growth promotants in finishing and nurseries, and that's when they detected their first case of livestock-associated MRSA. So after using growth promotants for 50-odd years, they remove them, and several years later, they have the appearance of livestock MRSA, and they all have increasing MRSA cases. So again, most of the MRSA cases there have got absolutely nothing to do with the livestock sector. But again, people expecting simple outcomes from complex phenomena when the data say, well, the growth promotant probably hasn't had anything to do with this story. Okay, I don't want to take too much time, but one thing, I show this slide just about every time I talk on this subject, and it's talking about, actually points out what a great job this industry's done in terms of antimicrobial stewardship over the last 30, 40 years, because government data in 1978 said market hogs, US, random sample, 5 or 9% of them had violative residue levels in market hogs. So 1 in every 7 pigs or something like that had a violative residue in 1978. If we had a tenth of that now, we would get so much public heat you couldn't believe it, and back then we got almost none. So again, just shows the sensibility to what's going on in the industry. Our recent data, 2011, no violative residues in antibiotics, none over the last 4 years where we've got published data, so none in 1,200 roughly market hogs. Sorry, need to go back there. And they also test animals seen at risk. So they have a random sample, and out of 11,500 animals seen to be at risk due to lesions or something else the inspectors saw, we only had 1 positive residue. So we've essentially got close to a perfect record on residues in recent years in the industry through veterinary oversight, through PQA, through consumer education, through discipline from export markets. So actually we can't get better on that. If we're going to say, okay, we're going to change the rules now and we'll get better, we can't get better on residues because we're already there. Okay, I'll skip through that little bit. The one thing I'll just show you is trends, and this is from the national data on multiple drug-resistant salmonella in people. And over the last, you see the data, 97 to 2010, actually the trend in drug-resistant salmonella in the US is already quite clearly in the downward direction, and that's probably due to things that have happened in food safety on the meat side, in part, possibly other factors. So if we change it now, we're probably not going to see a measurable improvement in decline of resistance, because we're already down at only about 10-12% of multiple drug-resistant salmonella. So a lot of progress has happened that's had nothing to do with changing animal availability of antimicrobials. Okay. The last thing is, I don't think we've got all these other things. We can't, I think, use residues as a way of how we're going to measure success, or probably multiple drug-resistant salmonella. I don't think we've got any reliable measures in the public health sector at all to say this is how we'll demonstrate success in terms of public health. And as I mentioned before, our professional critics will never be satisfied. I'll stop there because we want to have time for the panel. I just really wanted to have the outward-looking part of this regulatory change to complement what my colleagues have done before.